In our Western Front Plans video, we mentioned the 75, the main French artillery piece, which is nothing to compare to the German artillery guns. Not only could the French not respond effectively, they also did not at all. The French commanders in charge had no real correlation. Another thing was the mentality of the artillery. The French commanders were terrible at using it if it was even used. Some French generals even attacked their own men due to poor communication. The Germans were not having the best time either. Artillery, though deadly and killed millions in the war, did not have the desired effect. Yes, the French were scared, and yes, they were demoralized, but the French were not gone. The French counterattack mentality that the Germans hoped to take advantage of was also killing them. By the end of the day, Bois de Haumont and Bois de Herbois were gone, while Bois de Cause being held barely by Driant. By the second day, the Germans had taken territory. A lot for sure, but not enough to justify the attack. The battle turned into a barrage and squad attacks. The French returned to fight back as the Germans returned to barrage. The main element was supposed to be the artillery fight, so the Germans had continually sent out men, as the French continued to defend in certain areas. Bois de Clause fell with Street getting shot. Hans von Swell was successful leading the reserve corps in northern points. The Germans' advance was not stopping, however, continuing their advance in certain areas. The 7th Corps went for Barbent and then Champ-Neuville. The Landwehr Corps went for Hill 295. These 4 days would be a French disaster, seeing it from the perspective of both generals and soldiers. For the generals, it was only a disaster. The disorganized nature of the generals did not allow for a successful counterattack, allowing for land not being held for certain periods. Of course, this could be blamed on lack of communication due to artillery fire causing telegraph and telephone wire to be broken, but they also had no desire to follow orders. And during this war, the average military IQ of the French was low. Meanwhile, the French soldiers suffered. The days of the frozen tundra were over, and the German reign of fire was beginning. The day was filled with friends and peers blown to smithereens. The day was filled with artillery strikes, and at the end of the day, its retreat to a new line, such as the 24th. Even certain counterattacks fail, such as the one at the Bois de Clause. The French forces might be in a constant state of pain, but the Germans were in a constant state of disappointment. The Germans were gaining land, but the artillery is not having its desired effect. If the intent was attrition, the Germans were failing miserably. The French counterattacks were wearing down their fighting capabilities. The Germans were also losing time, as a quick victory seemed out of grasp. Though the battles were still in their favor as the Germans began to close in on the heart-shaped ring of fortresses, was the infamous Fort Dumont, Fort Vaux, and Fort Sauville. The Fort Dumont would fall on the 25th, and the battle was a sad story. The fort was the largest in the world in terms of concrete, and was defended by French soldiers all around. But as Verdun was a synonym for the Greater World War, Dumont was a synonym for how underdefended Verdun was. A fort which was supposed to be filled with the brim with men only had 40 of them, who were barely defended, as there were only few were firing outside. The German 24th Brandenburg Regiment approached the fort with ease. The leader, Sergeant Kunz, entered the moat with 10 engineers. After finding a door, Kunz went in alone, with the other engineers in fear of the French. Kunz, with his trusty pistol in hand, entered a dark tunnel, coming out to a room with a French machine gun towards the window. The men surrendered, as did the rest of the fort. With a man and a pistol, the French lost to the Germans. On March 4th, the Germans would capture the city with the same name. It was not all darkness for the French, however, as a new general arrived, Philip Pétain. Pétain was one of the best generals in the French army. I think, personally, Pétain should not be known as a French general. When I say that, I mean that in the way he would not instantly counterattack lost ground, but instead formulated master plans to hold and eventually retake lost ground. Pétain was like Ulysses S. Grant of the Union Army in the U.S. Civil War. Both Grant and Pétain worked long and hard to figure out how to defeat the enemy. Mostly, they both also, and most importantly, cared about manpower over land power, both seeing having superior manpower being important than retaking ground, which would never disappear. Also, in a way, they were both some of the only good generals in their field. Pétain quickly got to work, though after arriving, he became severely ill. Only the top generals knew of his condition, and May worried for his life and Verdun as a whole. But Bataan persisted, ordering improved trenches, a halt to counterattacks, and the improvement of the so-called Sacred Way. The Sacred Way was the one and only road leading to Verdun, and not only did Bataan expand it, he also strengthened the ground of the road to stop trucks from getting stuck in the mud. Meanwhile, the Germans were stunned. The German advance had slowed, but not stopped. The next months saw fighting on the left bank of the Meuse.